Welcome to the Ngoma Zethu podcast, episode 3. In this episode, we'll be talking about tradition. That word tradition is used in many settings, many settings. It could be traditional music, traditional that, traditional attire. It's a word that's very versatile. But in this context, when you talk about how African people at home and abroad, in Africa, as usual, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in North America, and in Europe, how they use traditional. What they use, when they say tradition, traditional. These days, when you talk about tradition or traditional, it's always associated with indigenous people. All of a sudden, European practices are no more traditional, because I guess traditional means that it's kind of inferior, or it's primitive, or it lacks finesse. It lacks, the bourgeois. It lacks like where those things, the shiny thing that people want. But if you look at it in the correct sense, traditional is just pretty much the custom, the practices of a specific area, what they do, how they dress, and things like that, or how they conduct certain ceremonies and all that. The reason why this podcast on tradition was suggested by my fellow uh, collaborators is that every time, if there's like an interracial marriage, I'll start there. Let's say somebody in Africa is marrying somebody who's not African, they're European, or they're Chinese, or they are Japanese, or they're from other parts of the world. The first thing that you hear, they say, oh, they're going to have the traditional wedding, the African traditional wedding. And then once the wedding, if let's say they're having two ceremonies in the different parts of the world, once it leaves Africa, it's no more traditional. It becomes just normal. We're going to have a wedding. It's no more like traditional, right? Events, social events, especially those events that are conducted by, corporations or governments, the bourgeoisie, my nemesis, the crowd that I don't participate in. Those events, they will, when you receive an invitation, there will be an area where it says a traditional attire allowed or something like that. Meaning that anything that's not like a suit and tie is traditional. When a suit and tie is a traditional dress, it just happens to be specific to a certain group of people that Ray came up with it, but it is a traditional dress. It's no different. So when people, especially African people, always see themselves as their food, their clothing, their practices become traditional, but then when they go on the other side, all of a sudden it's not traditional. You have already accepted. When you're thinking like that, you have already accepted that you're inferior, because there's something about that traditional. That means it doesn't quite fit the standards. And what the standards are, I don't know, because I don't participate in those things. Those things are very irrelevant to me. But I've seen in my entire life, traveling around the world, all the continents, South America, all over the Caribbean, all over Africa, here in the United States, all the 50 states, up into Canada, you see the same things, where if there's an interracial marriage that involves like an African, there's always the traditional, oh, they're going to do traditional, and they're going to do the other wedding, which would be, if the person is not an African, then they're doing the real normal wedding, but the African was traditional. And so you see how oppressed people can participate in their own destruction, in their own, like, sometimes you accuse other people, but you're also participating, because African clothing is not traditional clothing, it's clothing. Now, it might not be like a suit and tie, which I've never worn. like a tie. I've never seen the purpose of a tie. I don't know the purpose, so I can't wear something that I've never found the purpose. I don't know what the purpose is for a necktie, so I don't wear those things. Or suit, I don't wear those things. But if those things are considered like normal, and then anything else is traditional, then there's a conspiracy between the Africans that want to belong, and then the people that want to control, that want to present their idea of clothing as the standard. There's a conspiracy. You're participating in the conspiracy. So you cannot be like, one day you can't be like, wake up and say that, oh, there's racism because things are not going your way, because you're already participating in it. You're already participating in it. You have already established yourself as inferior, that you're just going to be traditional. So when people do these things, we're going to go into like music. There's a term they use. They call that world music. See, there's no such a thing as world music. It's a lie. It's people that just like make up words and there's no one to challenge them and they don't know much about those things. They just go ahead and then they go ahead. It becomes the same thing. Or they're playing traditional music. All music are traditional, really, when you think about it. It's a tradition that has evolved. Now, there are other traditions that are much older than others. If you look at the new countries, especially the newly formulated countries that came in after what they call the New World, after the plantation slavery, where the traditions are very young as compared to some of the Persian or the African or the Chinese culture, but they're just like newer tradition or newer music, but they're all traditional music. So when you say traditional or tradition in a sense, you have to know what you're talking about. If it's about, look, are we just going to do the same tradition, like we do all the time? That means the practice that you do all the time, so that the people around you, you have been doing that all the time, then you can do that. But when you use it to kind of really separate things, or to start like really dividing things, like, okay, that's traditional, that means it's not quite there, then there's a problem. There's a big problem that, like I've said, that you are really helping perpetuate. You're helping push that whole ignorance in a lot of ways. And when you're doing it, you're actually taking pride in ignorance because you have accepted that, oh, okay, yeah, we did the traditional wedding in Africa, and then we went to Europe, to whether it's like the bride or the groom's place, and then we did the wedding. Well, they are doing the traditional European wedding over there. That's what they're doing. If you don't know, that's what they're doing. It's the traditional European wedding, how the Europeans have their weddings. Now, it's not going to be the same as the Africans do it. The Africans is totally different. The idea of weddings and social events, they're totally different. But it's not the other one is traditional, and the other one more mainstream or acceptable. Like, this is the way how we do this. If you don't do this way, that means you're doing the traditional way. And we have to kind of completely demolish those myths and that way of thinking. That way of thinking, it's people that are sort of, they're educated in books, academics, they have done, but they don't, the whole idea of culture and life, they haven't been cultured. They haven't been cultured to understand that, no, if somebody's wearing a suit or like a veil, a white thing, the wedding gown, that's European way. Now the Africans not gonna, the Khoisan people not gonna wear like that in Southern Africa. Their music is different. Their traditions is different. They're not gonna cut a cake because they don't eat like that. That's not their diet. They don't consume that amount of sugar. So it's not their tradition. So we can't say that, okay, because they didn't do those things, they didn't consume a lot of sugar and a lot of cheese and all that, that means not a traditional wedding. Then we deserve to be where we are, really, because we are participating, we are cooperating, on oppression. We're looking down upon ourselves under the pretext of being, sophisticated, while pretending to be sophisticated. When we don't understand things properly, because everything is given to us, words and practices, everything is given to us. This is how it works. No, there's no such a thing. There's no one group of people on planet Earth that will decide that, okay, this is how a wedding or a funeral works, or this is like a traditional, or we went to bury my father in Africa, and I couldn't go to the village because they were doing the traditional funeral. There's no such a thing. They were doing their own funerals. So how they do their funerals. So if let's say you come over here, you come back here, that okay, you're back here, and then something happens, you have to bury somebody else, then that wedding was normal for you. I mean, that funeral was normal for you. Like, oh yeah, I went to the funeral. You don't even talk about we didn't go there to participate, but they're doing traditional things. Well, every wedding has every funeral or wedding has traditional things. When you go to the church, when the minister or the pastor is going through all that ritual, the eulogy and all the stuff, when they're burying, when they do the ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and all that, that's tradition. That's tradition. So we should make sure that we do not pass that ignorance to our children anymore. Those days are gone. We don't live in that time anymore. It's like we don't live that time. We should not live in that time. It's too late. Like we should know how to read the time now. We don't live that time anymore. And so the tradition, look at it from a very sophisticated view. When people talk about the world music, I know there's no such a thing. There's no such a thing. All music is world music. The music they play in America came from Africa. It came from Portugal, Spain. Some of it came from Europe. That's the world. It's world music. So never be lied to by people that just don't know things very well, and they put out these terms, these words, and all of a sudden everybody's using them without even knowing what they mean. And then we're all trapped in ignorance and just saying things that don't make sense. So let's watch the words that we use. Not just because they've been passed on, as they've been said by a million people, a billion people, doesn't mean that it's correct. Thank you for watching this episode. I will see you in episode number 4. Thank you.